There's a tradition in weddings today where the groom carries the bride over the threshold. It looks romantic, sweet even, but that tradition didn't start out sweet. It started out as damage control. Because for most of human history, in cultures scattered across every continent, a wedding wasn't always something a woman walked into. Sometimes, it was something she was dragged into. Literally. Today we're going to unpack one of the strangest, darkest, and most misunderstood customs in human history: bride kidnapping. Why did it happen? Why did it happen almost everywhere, independently, with no cultures ever talking to each other? And why do we still, without realizing it, act out pieces of it at weddings today? Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers are where this gets interesting. In small ancient tribes, something called a skewed sex ratio was a constant problem. Wars killed young men, but they also created something else: a shortage of marriageable women in certain groups, and a surplus of unmarried men in others, depending on tribal alliances, raiding, and who controlled resources. When there aren't enough potential wives to go around, and your entire evolutionary drive is to pass on your genes, men didn't just wait patiently. They organized, they planned, and in many tribes, they raided. Anthropologists call this marriage by capture. And it wasn't rare. It wasn't a horror story from one dark corner of the world. It shows up in the earliest Roman legends, in Mongolian steppe cultures, in parts of the Caucasus, in Central Asia, even among Aboriginal Australian tribes and Native American groups. Different continents, different centuries. Same solution to the same brutal math problem. Take Rome. One of the founding myths of Rome itself is literally called the rape of the Sabine women, where Roman men, short on wives to build their new city's population, invited a neighboring tribe to a festival, and then abducted their daughters. This wasn't hidden shame. Romans told this story for centuries as their origin myth. It was framed as clever, even necessary. But here's the part that surprises most people. In many of these cultures, bride kidnapping wasn't always actual, violent abduction. Sometimes it was theater. In parts of the Balkans, and in Kyrgyzstan, even into the 20th century, there's a practice called kachuu, which translates to grab and run. A man, sometimes with friends, would seize a woman off the street, take her to his family's home, and pressure her into agreeing to marry him. Some of these were prearranged. The couple already liked each other, but the community demanded a dramatic capture ritual to satisfy tradition or to avoid an expensive dowry negotiation. A staged kidnapping was, in a strange way, cheaper than a real wedding. But some of them were not staged. Some of them were real. Women taken against their will, forced into marriages they never agreed to. This is where the evolutionary story gets uncomfortable. Because it wasn't just about desperate men filling a shortage. It was also about strategy. In tribal societies, marriage wasn't just love. It was alliance building. It merged families, land, and power. If you couldn't negotiate a marriage through peaceful means, maybe your tribe was poor. Maybe you were low status. Maybe the woman's family said no capture was the shortcut. And once a woman had been taken, especially if the marriage was consummated, her family often had no real choice but to accept it. Her value in the marriage market, to other men, had just been permanently altered by the standards of the time. The capture wasn't just about getting a wife. It was about closing every other door. Brutal, yes. But evolution doesn't reward kindness. It rewards whatever gets genes into the next generation. And for a huge stretch of human history, in the absence of laws, police, or social consequences, capture worked. So now let's connect this to your own wedding, or one you've been to. Remember the best man? That title has a chilling origin. In old Germanic and Norse tribes, the best man wasn't chosen for giving toasts. He was chosen because he was, quite literally, the best fighter available, the man you need beside you if the bride's family showed up to take her back by force. The groomsmen? Originally your armed backup, carrying the bride over the threshold? Some historians trace this to preventing her from resisting, or symbolically preventing her from looking back toward her father's house, because in a capture marriage, going back wasn't an option anymore. Even the honeymoon has a theory behind it. Some historians argue it comes from Northern European bride capture practices, where the couple would go into hiding for a full cycle of the moon, roughly a month, so her family couldn't find her and take her back before the marriage was undeniably established. A tradition we now treat as the most romantic part of a wedding may have started as a hiding period after an abduction. None of this means every wedding custom today is secretly sinister. Most people carrying their partner over a threshold have no idea about any of this. And that's fine, traditions evolve, and meanings change completely over generations. But it says something about us, about how deep some of these patterns go. Rituals that started as survival strategies, or as brutal shortcuts around consent and negotiation, softened over thousands of years into symbols of love. The behavior fades, the symbol survives, and that's the pattern you'll see again and again if you study human history through this lens, the ugliest. Most practical solutions of our ancestors slowly get sanded down by time into things we call tradition, until we forget they ever meant something else at all. If you find this as unsettling and fascinating as I do, subscribe, because this channel exists to dig up exactly these kinds of buried patterns in human behavior, one uncomfortable truth at a time.